to Sandy Park. We are crossing the pond today to get some insight from Hamptons International, Lil Ignatius and Matt Goldsworthy, who head up international for Hamptons International and have quite a bit of perspective to share with us. Welcome, Lil. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
How are sales looking in Europe as a whole?
Really interesting. So transactions are down across the board in as a broad brushstroke, looking at the whole of Europe. Similar to you, we've had super high cost of living. So we've seen our interest rates rise very high.
What's very high to you?
5% at the moment.
Stop you for a second, because if you consider 5 high, all right, well, let's get into this a little bit, a little further here. What's low? What's low?
So we've seen really low. We've seen kind of 1%. We've seen very, very low levels. Bit of a deficit, from the last 15 years of government and struggling a little bit. So there's supposedly a 20 billion pound black hole that has to be filled. So that money has to come from somewhere. So
we got a big black hole.
I'm aware. Yeah.
We got a black hole too. We can line them all up. There are certain lenders, at least, that are hedging their bets on forward reductions and starting to offer better interest rates now. Are you finding more favorable interest
exactly
rates
what we've got
now?
Exactly that. So for the first time in a couple of years, we've seen a 3.99% mortgage for 2 years fixed, which we haven't seen offered for a long time. And lo and behold, that's come out this morning, probably 3 days ahead of when they're pretty sure that rate will come down. So they're trying to, that particular bank is trying to gain customer early. So I think that's a pretty good sign that rates will come down.
I'm starting to hear more people that are interested in Europe.
It seems like a lot of Americans are buying in Spain. Actually, when you look into the numbers, Americans make up only 1.8% of overseas buyers that are buying in Spain. So actually not that many in Spain. It's just a lot of noise has been around some of the bigger transactions. Italy, on the other hand, totally different story. So Italy, Americans can truly say that they are some of the top buyers in some of those key locations. Americans make up 28% of foreign buyers to Italy. That's a big percentage compared to anywhere else where Americans buy. Prices in Italy up about 7% year on year. Lake Como, they love Lake Como.
I was just there this past July.
No way. Oh, really? Yeah. So you took a vacation there?
Yeah. Yep.
It's a lovely part of the world.
So Lake Como is a top spot.
Lake Como is a top spot, and it doesn't really represent the rest of Italy because the price points there are pretty high. You could pay 800,000 euros, but actually, the budgets there, you could spend up to sort of 12, 15 million euros. High price points there. Puglia as a resort, as a region, Tuscany, and then some of the major cities. So Rome tended to be more appealing to Americans. Really, the history that's there. And then interestingly, Milan. And again, not that many Brits will look in that kind of region. Anecdotally, we've heard about more interest in Sicily, but actually that from what we've seen in figures, that tends to be tourist visitor numbers that hasn't quite translated into actual sales as yet. I mentioned is Liguria as well as a coastline there. Is quite popular. All of those locations make it very easy to travel into other parts of Europe. So those areas have been quite popular for Americans. And I was going to say Portugal a little bit lower for Americans. They make up 10% of the overseas buyers.
Are they buying primary or are they buying secondary homes?
We've seen a greater percentage looking for secondary homes, and these tend to be people that have holidayed a lot, vacationed a lot in Italy. At the much higher end, we have seen some movement of people completely relocating. I don't know if you're aware, but there is an attractive tax regime in Italy that has attracted some people from the higher end. Some Brits have been looking at it, but Americans have been looking at it. So if you completely move everything to Italy, then you can pay a flat rate tax of 200,000 euros. It was last year 100,000 euros, but they've just changed it. If you earn millions and millions, that is all you'll pay. You'll come to Italy, pay 200,000 euros tax. You can buy a property for 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, whatever. come and base yourself here, and you've got a nice low tax compared to what you might have paid in the US or the UK or somewhere else. So that has taken some people at the top end. Definite ploy by the Italians. One, to encourage that money to come in and encourage overseas investment, and two, also to renovate a lot of properties. Americans, as a bit like us as Brits, Americans are actually willing to look at fabulous old rundown properties that have a massive history, vineyards that have a main house that is 400-500 years old, that Italians will go, oh no, it's rundown, I'm not spending another million euros doing it up.
For that, salivating.
But yeah, I mean, you guys love that, absolutely love it. Rich with history, no one else wants to touch it in terms of the local market, and someone will come in and make it absolutely stunning. And so that's very, very attractive. So I think Italy have been quite clever to position themselves and attract that wealth. So I would say Italy number one. Let's see if anyone else wants to debate that, who watches this.
And Portugal, I've heard quite a bit.
There you
go.
Portugal. Yeah, absolutely right. I would definitely say Portugal, and in particular two parts of Portugal. Lisbon is number one. Lisbon has really encouraged a lot of Americans, and probably a greater percentage to actually fully relocate. There has been a lot of investment from the west coast of the US, a lot of tech companies investing from California in Lisbon. I think Lisbon actually has, as an example, I think the fastest high-speed broadband internet in the whole of Europe, as an example. Big companies, big tech companies base themselves there. Obviously, one of our big telecommunication companies that we have in Europe is Vodafone. Their headquarters is now in Lisbon, as an example, rather than being in another capital city. This is all part of the tech bubble. Their universities are now teaching every course in English rather than the local Portuguese language, because of the influx of all those tech jobs and people wanting to study a tech job in order to secure one as soon as they've left university, and therefore doing it all in English. Again, it's part of the evolution of Lisbon, and therefore we're seeing a lot of Americans move over, and the Portuguese have made it very attractive over the last few years to be a digital nomad, to go and work from Portugal. Made it very easy tax-wise to do that, and similar to Italy, but perhaps at a more affordable, more appealing level, they've made it possible that if you move everything to Portugal, you'll only pay 20% income tax. Whereas Portuguese nationals, if you've been living there, the highest rate of tax today is 45% in Portugal. Difference. So it's a big difference. You have to have, there aren't really any loopholes. So, as a Portuguese person, you have to have lived outside of Portugal for at least, 5 years. But so for an American moving over, that's quite attractive. The same for your pension. So if you've got a big pension that you're worried about being taxed on as you take it, as you enjoy it, if you bring that to Portugal, only 10%. So 10% tax on that pension. Which has been attractive for some people.
You're seeing the most action in the UK right now.
Places like Manchester or in investment areas that will be coming up in Liverpool, Birmingham, the Midlands, which historically haven't had that much investment, but are now quite hot. And we see a lot of overseas money coming into those regions. We have had quite a lot of money coming in from Hong Kong and the Far East. Many of them are actually fully relocating. Our prices have been very flat, if not ticking down in London over the last year. That's made us very attractive to overseas markets, especially the Americans, especially people from the Middle East. Middle East, don't forget, has got lots of money. The oil price, energy prices have gone up. Places like London look very cheap. They look really cheap. They haven't done much for a long time. France is just having a little bit of a downturn. So France, some prices have ticked down by about 4%, in some regions as much as 8% in this first half of the year. And there are other areas where the transactions volumes are down, but actually there's also been a low supply coming onto the market, which has caused prices to increase. Italy would be one of those places. Portugal would be one of those places. Ukraine crisis, which has pushed up all of our prices. So we've had inflation, and therefore interest rates have gone up. I know it's all relative, isn't it? So everyone secured an interest rate very low, borrowed lots of money, and now they're feeling the pain. That's what we've got. and it's stagnated the market. So last year in the UK, we had 25% less transactions across the whole of the UK, just as a, which is a realtor's nightmare, because you want volume of transactions. Whether price is going up or down, you want volume of transactions. So that's what happened, and things stagnated. And we are really waiting for those interest rates to come down. We've had a little movement last time the Bank of England got together, which was a month ago. And actually, in talking to you in real time, we expect another movement on Thursday when they all meet and they come out with a decision. We think it might go down. That might unpop the cork, as it were, and start making more transactions. We expect markets like France to have a slight correction, but not massive, a tick down. But again, historically, in France, prices have gone up, they've gone down. They haven't been as stable as bits of the US, as stable as bits as, say, London, the UK. And most of Europe is a little more difficult to predict than the UK. Those areas that have been very hot, Portugal, we expect to level off a little bit and plateau. Italy will probably level off and plateau. I'm talking very broadly, though, because there's so many different individual markets. If you were to head to, I mean, a lot of Americans like to head to Saint-Tropez, Saint-Maxime, Cannes on the south coast of France. Those little pockets there are their own little micro, economy, and they'll have their own niche buyers of very high net worth individuals who fight over the positions that overlook different rocks and cliffs and right next to the beach. And those prices in any market just seem to go up. Similar to ski resorts. I think even in the worst years, those ski resorts, high altitude ski resorts that attract high net worth buyers, that also have summer activities, slightly sheltered from climate change and the lack of snow that may be coming, have just continue to do well, and they will carry on doing well, I'm sure. So little areas like that you can always pick out that will continue to do well. But I think the UK on a whole is easier maybe to predict than other parts of Europe. And I think from what Matt's saying, we tend to predict prices are going to tick up in 2025. Let Matt talk about the UK. It's much more than me.
We've had a really interesting time here, I suppose. We've had obviously locally a big boom, like a number of other centres around the world since COVID. So after the pandemic, there was a domestic boom where everyone had obviously spent years in their homes, realised they didn't like their homes, they'd outgrown their homes. And so there was a huge move, a race for space. I think the world experienced that trend, and the market here was fantastic. And during that time, obviously, the international market buying into the UK was not fantastic, simply because of limitations on travel primarily. So I suppose over the years since the pandemic, we've seen international buyers slightly increase again, as people have started traveling and holidaying and working in the UK a bit more. And then in the same vein, the UK market has really suffered since the high interest rate environment over the last sort of 2 years or so. So we haven't had the price decreases that we would have expected, and that's simply because everybody was locked into 2 or 5 year mortgage terms, and so those high interest rates didn't really impact that many people, and actually obviously we've seen some downward pressures on interest rates already, and so people might have even escaped that environment by the time they come to renew. So that has sheltered us, and we haven't actually seen big price decreases, maybe single percent over the last 2 years.
Here in the States, we have had definitely an inventory shortage that has plagued us for the past 4 years, and we are definitely up from our lowest low, which we hit a few years ago, and we've been slowly, going up in inventory. But there's this reality of these sellers that sounds like you're having the same experience, that have been sitting on the sidelines because they've got these lower interest rates and they don't want to go and get into a higher interest rate. Now we do have talk of interest rates continuing to lower as we go ahead. I focus on the Hudson Valley in New York, but in our area, I am expecting to see more sellers coming on the market beginning in Q1 with an increase, has the capability of turning us from the seller's market that we are still in into more of a neutral, if not even a buyer's market at some point in 25. And I think that there's these different driving forces to it, because I don't think that the only thing, at least in our area, that is holding back buyers are the interest rates. I think there are other things that are holding back buyers from getting back into the market, aside from interest rates, at least a certain amount of them. And I think where the question really is will the amount of buyers that actually come back into the market be less than the sellers that enter their homes on the market? And then that, of course, hits that supply and demand. What are you looking at when you're looking at your look ahead for 25? I mean, none of us have a crystal ball, but what's your take on where things are going to go in the UK and in Europe as a whole? What are you kind of expecting?
I think similar to you, a lot of sellers have been holding back putting their properties on the market, and yeah, there's not many transactions happening because there's not much stock locally. We usually get a bit of a boom around this time when sellers are back from their summer holidays and they list. However, I'm not sure if you know, but we have a budget scheduled for next month. Obviously under our new Labour government, and everyone is watching that domestically. There may be implications for tax and various taxes surrounding property and personal wealth. So I think a lot of people are still sitting on the fence, and I don't think we'll see that real drive on local stock. I don't think we'll see that until Q1, to be honest. Because let's face it, as soon as we've got over the budget, it will be the run into Christmas. Whether it will turn into a buyer's market anytime soon, I think not. I think affordability in London anyway is still a big issue. We have had government schemes in the past, such as Help to Buy, which helped first-time buyers, and that was fantastic for the market and really fueled the whole property market from the bottom up. However, that has run its course, and there's no sign of any help for those first-time buyers to come in. So affordability still is the big issue, and yeah, getting those buyers onto the ladder for their first home is going to be tricky. We do, however, have the same old supply and demand issues within the new homes sector. Our planning system in the UK is very slow, so just no new starts come through or quick enough to meet the demand in London anyway. And apparently Labour are changing that. The new government are going to be able to push through planning a lot quicker, but yeah, we're yet to see that. So a lot in the air at the moment in the UK, but obviously if you own a property already, then you're in a pretty good spot.
As far as Airbnb is concerned, we have had quite a bit of restrictions here in the States when it comes to Airbnb. What's the general pulse there with that?
So this is a real contradiction, because a lot of parts of Europe, and you mentioned at the beginning of the call, the Balearics, the islands off of Spain, Ibiza, Mallorca, a lot of these places, southern Spain, big parts of Portugal, Italy, and so on, depend on tourism. We've got huge problems across Europe with rental prices and availability of accommodation. Just a massive issue. Airbnb is part of that, but not to ring fence one company. Just a general shortage of properties has caused a real problem, and rental prices that are too big for the workforce that needs to come in seasonally and stand behind bars and restaurants and wait on people and all of those jobs, to be paying an average of sometimes €2,000 a month in various different parts of holiday resorts just to live there and get, that's most of a wage, for that level of worker, and that has caused big backlash. And we're starting to see, as a result of that, some different regimes come in. Let's pick one of them. So pick Mallorca. So there's a scheme called the ETV in Mallorca as an example. So you now need effectively a license to rent your property in Mallorca, and they'll only give out a certain number. So there'll be a quota, there'll be a number across the island of rental licenses, and you'll have to apply, you'll have to meet certain quality standards, have proper deposits deposited in certain accounts, all that type of thing. There are anecdotally places and that want to ban Airbnb type setups, but essentially more licenses are coming in to rent out properties, and we're seeing those homes sold with that as part of the sales document. So that license will go with the property. So let's stick with Mallorca, an island off of Spain in the Balearics in the Mediterranean. So a lot of properties being sold with an ETV, and that makes it more attractive. So a little bit more difficult to get it, but you have the certainty of having that for a while, unless the quality for some reason dipped, or if there were some big complaints filed to the local government, to the tourism department, then that property is probably going to keep securing its license.
Keep it, don't you, indefinitely, unless something goes wrong. And it's almost like the new properties that want to gain a license.
Exactly.
It's those landlords that struggle. Is that right?
Spot on. Yeah, exactly. But you're seeing a little bit of variation, uncertainty.
I'm seeing variation. I'm seeing some areas where flat out you're just not doing it. But then you see all different variations. You see yearly lotteries. You see along the lines of what you just said too, where somebody will renew each year as long as they're staying in line with what it needs to be, but there's a restricted amount of people that can do it. So you're seeing a real variation with Airbnb, but it's as far as investors are concerned, I'm letting them know this, because the reality is they could buy into an Airbnb friendly municipality and literally 6 months later it's not. So I mean, there is that underlying reality, because it really is changing in some areas with on a dime.
London now has put in restrictions on Airbnb and allows you to rent only up to 90 days in London through that portal. However, what landlords are doing is they're giving it to short let agents, who are then using a multitude of platforms in which to short let their property. So they might use booking.com, they might use the individual agent's website. So they're renting it more than 90 days, but only 90 days through Airbnb. That's how they're getting around it.
So they're working around it by going to different portals. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We've really enjoyed it. And thanks for reaching out to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy.
Have a good day, guys.